So King Charles just slammed his hand down on a mahogany table so hard it sounded like a gunshot echoing through Buckingham Palace. And the immediate consequence was a room full of terrified staff watching Queen Camilla get completely dismantled by Princess Anne. And honestly, the reason this is so much bigger than a family argument is because of what Camilla was actually trying to steal, and how Anne stopped her without even raising her voice. Before we get into all of it, make sure you are subscribed to Palace Tea tonight, so you do not miss updates as more details come out. We break this stuff down every week. All right, let us start where the story actually begins, because the explosion in that corridor was just the breaking point. And here is the part that actually gets crazy. We are talking about a Tuesday morning briefing that was supposed to be completely routine. King Charles has been under this crushing level of strain for weeks. You can actually see it in his face, this tight exhaustion that he carries around every single day. So he is sitting there trying to get through this standard household meeting. And out of nowhere, Queen Camilla physically places herself between the king and Princess Anne. Like she literally steps into the physical space to block him. And she just starts screaming. She is railing at her sister-in-law over a scheduling dispute. And the staff in the room. They are basically paralysed. We are talking about senior aides. People who have worked in that building for decades, literally staring at the carpet pattern. Because they are so genuinely terrified of what is happening right in front of them. One guy reportedly froze with his pen hovering right over his notebook. And honestly, when you picture that room, you realise how out of control this had to be. This is the heart of the monarchy, and it is sounding like reality television. But here is where it stops being just a dramatic family fight and turns into something much darker. Princess Anne does not flinch. She does not step back. She does not raise her voice to match Camilla. She just stands there. She is perfectly still, watching the Queen Consort completely lose her mind. And that stillness, that absolute refusal to engage in the emotional chaos, was somehow more devastating than if she had screamed back. It was like watching someone hit a solid brick wall. Camilla is throwing all this fury, all this resentment, and Anne is just letting her exhaust herself. And look, the staff instinctively feel this. They are looking at Anne. They are deferring to Anne's silence. And that drives Camilla even crazier, because she realises right in that exact moment that she can scream. All she wants, she can wear the crown. But she does not actually command the room. Anne commands the room. And I think that is the detail that made everyone stop cold. Because Charles is sitting there watching this happen. He is watching his wife attack his sister in front of the very people who keep the monarchy running. And he realises, with this painful clarity, that the damage is not private anymore. It is happening in plain sight. If he does not stop it right then and there, the whole illusion of his authority just crumbles to dust. So he snaps. He brings his hand down on this solid mahogany table so hard that the crack of it literally echoes down the corridor like a gunshot. Everyone jumps, and his voice comes out deep and guttural, basically shaking with total wrath. He orders every single staff member out of the room immediately. The aides scramble. They are practically tripping over themselves to get out of that toxic atmosphere. But as they are leaving, one senior household secretary turns back for one last look. And what he sees is the part that actually changes everything. Charles is not glaring at Anne. He is not looking at her like she caused this massive mess. He is staring directly at his wife, and his face is full of unmitigated rage. He is looking at Camilla like she just set fire to the palace. And honestly, she kind of did. Because what nobody in that room realised yet was that the trap had actually been set days earlier. Now here is what makes this even more significant. To understand why Charles reacted with such absolute violence, you have to understand what Camilla and Anne were actually fighting about. Because they were not arguing about who walks through a door first. They were not fighting about a seating chart at a family dinner. They were fighting over the state procession order. And to understand why this matters, you need to understand what this protocol actually is. In the royal world, the procession order is basically the geopolitical map of power. It dictates exactly who holds authority, who has the king's favour, and who matters. It is a visual representation of the entire British establishment. And the thing you have to know is that this order is governed by strict impersonal rules. It is not something you just change because you feel like it. But Camilla was trying to rewrite those rules to put her friends at the front. She wanted to move her preferred attendants, her people, up the chain of command. She wanted to turn a rigid institutional mechanism into a personal flex. And honestly, when you understand what this really meant, you realise this was not a simple misunderstanding. This was Camilla testing the fences to see if she basically owned the palace now. She wanted to see if the rules applied to her, or if she was finally powerful enough to bend them to her will. Think about what that actually means for a second. The monarchy relies entirely on stability. It relies on everyone believing that there is a system bigger than any one person. When Camilla tries to mess with the procession order, she is not just moving names on a piece of paper. She is telling the entire staff, the entire institution, that her personal desires are more important than centuries of established tradition. She is trying to prove that the crown is hers to play with. And that is a terrifying message for the people who actually run the building. Because if the Queen Consort can just snap her fingers and change the rules of a state event, then the rules do not mean anything anymore. We are not talking about a ceremonial title here. This is the core functioning of the state. Every time the royals step out in a procession, the entire world is watching. The diplomats are watching. The politicians are watching. Any slight deviation from the plan sends a massive signal. If Camilla moves her friends to the front, it sends a message that she is the one really pulling the strings. It is a total power grab completely disguised as a minor logistical update. And she almost got away with it, because people are generally too afraid to tell her no. But she fundamentally underestimated who she was dealing with. She assumed that because King Charles usually avoids conflict, she could just slide this past everyone. What she did not factor in was that Princess Anne considers the protection of these rules to be her literal life's work. Anne does not care about Camilla's feelings. Anne cares about the survival of the crown. And that underlying tension is exactly what made Camilla's secret scheme so incredibly dangerous. But to truly understand why Anne could do this without flinching, you have to go back. Most people remember that Camilla spent decades fighting to be accepted by the public. We all know the story of her public relations rehabilitation. What most people forget is that Princess Anne spent those exact same decades learning how to be a royal directly from Queen Elizabeth II. Anne did not just watch her mother rule. She absorbed her mother's entire philosophy of duty. Anne watched her mother sacrifice personal comfort, family harmony, and her own desires to protect the crown. For Elizabeth, duty was cold, impersonal, and absolute. It was never about what you wanted. It was only ever about what the institution needed. So when Anne looks at Camilla, she does not just see her brother's wife. She sees someone who treats the monarchy like a prize she finally won after a long game. And honestly, that is what turns the stomach here. Anne spent her whole life defending an institution that Camilla is now trying to use for personal validation. It is a direct insult to everything her mother built. You have to remember that Queen Elizabeth maintained the dignity of the crown through literal world wars, through massive family scandals, through decades of immense cultural shifts. And she did it by never ever putting herself above the protocol. She was the queen, but she served the crown. Camilla, on the other hand, is acting like the crown serves her. And for Anne, who practically has Elizabeth's stoicism built into her genetics, this is absolutely unforgivable. Like, this is not new. This goes back further than most people realise. For years, Anne had to bite her tongue and watch Camilla slowly edge her way into the centre of the family. She had to watch her brother tear the family apart to get what he wanted. And she accepted it, because that is what duty required. She kept her head down, did more royal engagements than anyone else, and just kept the machinery running, while Charles and Camilla dominated the headlines. But there is a massive difference between accepting Camilla as the king's wife and watching Camilla actively dismantle the rules that keep the monarchy alive. Anne can tolerate personal annoyance. She cannot and will not tolerate institutional sabotage. When she sees Camilla trying to rewrite the procession order for her own ego, it triggers every single instinct Anne has. It feels like a betrayal of the late Queen's memory. It feels like someone tracking mud all over a legacy that took a lifetime to build. And here is the thing. Anne knows exactly how fragile the monarchy really is right now. She knows that without the late Queen's gravity, they are all just walking a very thin line. Every mistake costs them. Every selfish move chips away at their legitimacy. So for Anne, stepping in to stop Camilla is not an act of petty jealousy. It is an act of sheer preservation. She is drawing a line in the sand because someone has to. And she is doing it with the exact same immovable reserve that her mother used to handle crises. That detail makes what happened next almost impossible to look away from. And this is the detail that stopped me cold when I first read it. Because the scheme was not just an idea. It was a fully baked plan. Days before the screaming match in the corridor, there was a quiet rehearsal for a major state reception. Camilla arrived at this rehearsal, completely believing she had finally outsmarted the system. She had secretly authorised a new arrangement instructing the senior staff to move her preferred attendants right to the front of the procession. The plan was staggering in its ambition, and honestly staggering in its audacity. She was using the king's official state event to prove that her personal whim overruled centuries of tradition. She had all the paperwork drawn up, she had the names moved, she had the staff prepped, and she did it all under the radar, assuming that by the time anyone noticed, it would be too late to change it back. She was basically daring anyone to challenge the Queen Consort in front of the king, and she was one step away from pulling it off. The staff were there, standing in their designated spots. The documents were printed and in hand. The whole thing was practically locked in. Does any of that sound like respect for the institution? Or does it sound like an ego trip wearing a royal mask? She had been building toward this kind of control for a long time. She wanted to prove to the old guard, the people who had looked down on her for decades, that she was the one calling the shots now. And if she could get away with altering a state procession order, she could get away with literally anything. It would set a new precedent that Camilla's word was the only protocol that mattered. But she made one fatal miscalculation. She did it in the exact same room as the Princess Royal. Anne was there at the rehearsal, completely silent, just watching the room. And Anne took one look at the paperwork. She did not throw a fit. She did not yell. She just stiffened. And she calmly walked over to an equerry, a senior military attendant, and quietly informed him that the modification was against protocol. That was it. One sentence. But because it was Princess Anne, that one sentence carried the weight of the entire British establishment. And here is where it gets genuinely humiliating for Camilla. The staff instantly obeyed Anne. They completely ignored Camilla's new orders and immediately reverted to the traditional protocol. They did not ask Camilla for permission. They did not check to see if the Queen Consort was okay with it. They just snapped back to the way it was supposed to be because Anne told them to. And they trust Anne. Camilla was furious, but she had to swallow it in the moment. She had this tight, fake smile plastered on her face, but she was seething. She thought the dispute was over. She thought she had just lost a minor battle and could try again later. She had absolutely no idea that the real damage had already been documented and that the next move was about to blow up in her face. Okay, so here is the part that actually changes everything. We have to move back to the immediate aftermath of that massive corridor screaming match from Chapter 1. Remember, Charles had just slammed his hand on the table and kicked everyone out. So Charles retreats to his private study. He is sitting there completely terrified that his wife just showed the entire senior staff that the monarchy is run by pure chaos. He is trying to figure out how to put a lid on this before it leaks to the press. Then the palace household secretary walks in. This is the guy in charge of literally everything behind the scenes, and he does not say a single word. He just walks straight up to the king's desk and lays down a single piece of paper. It is a formal written incident report of the corridor confrontation. And this is the moment where the whole story completely shifts. Because what that household secretary did was take a messy family argument and turn it into a matter of state. This is no longer a private feud between sister-in-laws, it is institutionalized. The harsh, lifeless wording of the report lists everything. It lists Camilla's screaming. It lists Anne's absolute reserve. It notes the exact presence of the witnesses. And because that piece of paper now exists in the official record, Charles cannot just ignore it. He cannot pretend it did not happen. If he does nothing, if he just sweeps it under the rug to protect his wife, the entire staff will read it as total weakness. They will know that the king is too scared to discipline his own household. And honestly, you have to appreciate the absolute brutal efficiency of the palace staff here. They did not gossip. They did not complain. They just documented the Queen Consort losing her mind and handed it directly to the king. It is their way of saying, you need to fix this, or we cannot do our jobs. What Charles found in that report changed the entire picture. It forced him out of his role as a weary husband and forced him to act like a monarch. He was staring down the barrel of an institutional crisis. If the staff lose respect for the chain of command, the whole machine breaks down. And Charles knew that Camilla was completely in the wrong. He knew that Anne had only been doing what was necessary to protect the event. He had to make a choice between his wife's ego and the survival of his own authority. And the choice he made is honestly something nobody thought he had the nerve to do. He did not make a speech. He did not give an interview. He just looked at a document, saw one name, and quietly removed it. Charles is sitting at his desk, still looking at the official incident report. For decades, he has shielded Camilla from everything. He shielded her from the press, from the anger of his own family, from history itself. He burned down his public image to make sure she was protected. But right now, the institution does not run on love. It runs on a clear, undeniable chain of authority. So he reaches for the master planning document for the upcoming state engagements. This is the legally binding schedule that dictates exactly who is in charge of what. He takes his fountain pen, and with one clean, heavy stroke, he crosses Camilla's name completely out of the oversight section. He just erases her authority over the event. Then he looks up at the household secretary, who is still standing there, and quietly dictates that Princess Anne will personally oversee the final ceremonial order from now on. And this is actually where it gets kind of brilliant when you think about it. There was no negotiation. There was no warning. The speed and decisiveness of the move were basically brutal. He stripped his wife of her newly claimed authority and handed it directly to the exact woman she had just attacked in the hallway. He did not ask Camilla for her side of the story. He did not try to mediate a peace treaty between them. He just shut the whole thing down with one stroke of a pen. Now, some of you are probably asking whether Charles can even do this, and the answer is yes. The monarch has absolute final say over household delegations. By signing that document, Charles made the shift legally binding within the palace structure. Camilla could not override it. She could not complain to another department. The decision was absolute and irreversible. It prevented her from ever trying to mess with the procession order again, and it sent a massive shockwave through the private offices. The king, who normally hates conflict, who normally tries to appease everyone, had just publicly gutted his wife's power in favour of his sister. It showed the staff that when push comes to shove, Charles will protect the crown over his marriage. The move was done. The paperwork was filed, but Camilla had not been told yet, and she was about to find out in the most humiliating way possible. And here is the thing, nobody announced anything. Nobody made a statement. But the message was completely clear. The sentence does not arrive with a royal proclamation or a big dramatic meeting. It comes the way everything in the palace comes through a quiet aide who cannot quite make eye contact. Camilla is sitting in her private quarters, probably still fuming about the argument with Anne, when a staff member walks in and nervously hands her the amended briefing schedule. She looks down at this paper, and right there under the section for ceremonial oversight, she sees that her name has been totally erased. And Princess Anne's name is sitting right where hers used to be. To an outsider, that might look like nothing. It is just a minor administrative update. But inside those walls in the royal world, every single gesture carries massive meaning. This was an execution. It was the system cleanly amputating her authority. Her first reaction is total shock. She grips the paper and asks the aide completely directly if Anne requested this change. She assumes Anne went behind her back. But the aide hesitates. And that hesitation is everything. The aide then looks at her and tells her that the order came directly from the king himself. And that is the moment the floor completely drops out from under her. The great impersonal machinery of the palace had turned against her. Charles had publicly sided with his sister, and the entire staff knew it. The people who serve her breakfast, the people who drive her cars, the people who manage her schedule. They all knew that the king had just stripped her of power. She was completely exposed. This is the visual symbolism of royal power dynamics. You do not need a public fight when you have a piece of paper that quietly proves you lost. And she felt that loss in her bones. She realised that she might have the title of Queen Consort, but the real functional power still belonged to the blood royals who actually understood duty. She had been publicly put in her place without a single word being spoken in her direction. Camilla's pride was entirely shattered. But what she did next proved that she still did not understand the game she was playing. She still had one desperate card left to play. But here is where the strategy fell apart. Camilla goes into full panic mode. She completely abandons any sense of royal composure. She marches down the hall and corners Charles privately in his chambers. The heavy wooden doors click shut, and she demands to know why Anne is being protected while she is left to endure this massive bureaucratic dishonour. She is angry, she is emotional, and she is lashing out. She tells him that Anne makes her feel like a total outsider. She confesses that Anne's constant quiet judgment makes her feel deeply insecure about her place in the family. It is this raw, desperate attempt to make Charles feel sorry for her. She is using the exact same emotional playbook she has used for decades to get Charles on her side. She expects him to soften. She expects him to apologise and find a way to fix it, so she does not look bad. But here is where the reality check hits. Charles is completely unmoved. He just stands there looking at her. And his silence honestly hurts her more than an argument would have. He does not rush to comfort her. He does not try to hold her hand. He tells her, with completely annihilating precision, that Anne did not need safeguarding. The Crown did. He tells her that the staff saw their king falter because of her petty tantrum, and that could not be permitted. He is basically telling her that her feelings do not matter anymore. The institution matters, and she actively harmed the institution. Camilla realises right in that moment that her tears and her anger have absolutely zero leverage here. She has spent years outmanoeuvring people who underestimated her. But she completely underestimated the fact that Charles is the king first and a husband second. The public relations machine could not save her. She could not spin this to the press because it all happened behind closed doors. Her entire damage control attempt just collapses. She is left standing in the room, realising that she has lost completely. The power dynamic has permanently shifted, and there is absolutely nothing she can do to change his mind. She built her own trap, and she walked right into it. But Charles was not finished. The paperwork was one thing. There was still one final consequence she had to face before this was over. And then on that Tuesday afternoon, Charles did something that made it impossible to pretend anymore. No statement, no press conference, no drama. Just one final action that sealed the entire situation forever. The final meeting takes place in a small, highly formal reception room deep inside the palace. There is no comfort here. There are no couches, no tea being served, no escape. Charles stands by the window in dead silence. Princess Anne walks in first. She is radiating this serene, untouchable restraint. She claims absolutely no victory. She does not look smug. She does not look angry. She just looks like a woman doing her job. And honestly, that lack of emotion only makes her look infinitely more powerful. Then Camilla enters. The air in the room is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Charles looks at his wife and he forces Camilla to deliver a face-to-face apology directly to Anne. He makes her say the words out loud. The apology is heavy and broken. It comes out with obvious painful effort. It is a total admission of complete defeat. She is standing there confessing that her personal pride defiled her regal duties. She is submitting to the Princess Royal and Charles is making sure it happens. Anne accepts the apology with icy calm. She does not tell Camilla it is okay. She does not hug her. She just states very simply that personal hurt can never be allowed to overrule official duty. It is a devastating response because it highlights exactly why Camilla failed. Then Charles speaks. His voice carries all the weight of the crown. He confirms that the new order is permanent. Princess Anne will handle the ceremonial oversight moving forward. And that was it. That was the whole thing. Done. The meeting ends and Camilla is dismissed. The visual confirmation is absolute. The king, the queen, and the princess royal all know exactly where the power lies. Camilla walks out of that room knowing that the title of queen remains hers. But the real power in the room had just been permanently locked away from her. What happens now is genuinely a completely different era for the monarchy. When you step back and look at the entire chain of events, what you actually see is a total shift in how this family operates. This was never just a fight about who walks where in a room at a state reception. This was a massive battle for the soul of the new reign. Camilla built this trap entirely by herself. She walked into it with her eyes completely open, assuming that being the king's wife meant she was suddenly above the rules. What she found out in the hardest way possible is that the ghost of Queen Elizabeth II still runs that building, and her absolute enforcer is Princess Anne. Anne did not have to yell. She did not have to leak a single thing to the press. She did not play dirty. She just stood perfectly still and let Camilla completely destroy her own authority. Anne proved that real power does not need to shout. Real power just waits for arrogance to trip over itself. And Charles proved something crucial here. He proved that, when pushed to the absolute brink, when the chips are really down, he will choose the survival of the monarchy over the feelings of his wife. He is not just a weary husband trying to keep the peace at home anymore. He is a monarch drawing a permanent, uncrossable line in the sand. He watched his wife try to usurp the protocol, and he shut her down with ruthless efficiency. This story reveals that the old guard, the blood royals who were raised in the shadow of the late queen, still hold the actual keys to the castle. Camilla might wear the crown, but she does not control the institution. She lost the trust of the staff, she lost the oversight of the event, and she lost the benefit of the doubt from her husband. The past finally caught up with the present. The institution will always protect itself first. Crowns can survive wrath, betrayal, and scandal, but only if duty remains stronger than pride.